Hi, my name is Elena Calabro. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a senior policy analyst with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Thank you guys so much for joining today's breakout session. This is about homelessness is a housing problem, best practices in housing first. So if that's the session that you're at, that you want to be at, welcome. So first of all, just a few housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded. Just so you know. And I think that's about it. We're also going to reserve some time afterwards for some Q&A. So awesome. Okay, well, thanks again for joining. This session is going to really dive into the underlying causes and the solutions to the homelessness crisis, which is a crisis in communities across the country. 500,000 people on any given night in the U.S. are unhoused, and that likely undercounts the severity of the crisis. And so today we're going to explore research demonstrating that homelessness is a housing problem. We're going to talk about the use of the Housing First model and hear how communities have used the model to move thousands of people into permanent housing. We're also going to have a really important conversation about why and how we can center the voices of people with lived experience as we develop and implement solutions to the crisis. So I'll go ahead and introduce, we have a really fantastic set of panelists today. First, we're joined by Anna Rausch, who currently serves as Vice President of Program Operations for the Coalition for the Homeless, the lead agency for the TX 700 Continuum of Care, which is also known as The Way Home. In this role, Anna has led in the development and implementation of nationally recognized programs and strategies that has led to a 63% reduction in homelessness in 10 years. Next, we're joined by Clayton Aldern, a data scientist and writer interested in science and society. He co-authored the book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem. Clayton has worked in computational neuroscience, environmental journalism, and homelessness policy. Most recently, he led the data analysis and program evaluation team for homelessness programs at Pierce County, Washington. His writing has been published by The Atlantic, The Economist, Scientific American, Crosscut, and others. Last but certainly not least, we're joined by Claudine Cipolli, who is the Director of Lived Experience and Innovation at Destination Home. Originally from American Samoa, Claudine served in the U.S. Navy and the Army National Guard before starting her work in the nonprofit sector. Her lived experience of homelessness makes her a subject matter expert intent on building compassion, disrupting status quo systems, and helping sector leaders clarify her local community's understanding of the root causes and solutions to the crisis. Thanks so much for joining us. So first, just to get started, I'm going to invite Clayton to tell us a little bit about his research. Like I said, this is the book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem. It's really, really critical in our work in terms of really identifying the root causes of the crisis, which, as it says in the book, it's a housing problem, as I'm sure all of you know. So I'm really just going to turn over to Clayton right now to kind of give us an overview of the research.
Gladly. All y'all can hear me, perfect. I would invite you all to read the book, but the takeaway is on the cover, so you can kind of just read the cover and be fine. I'm also just, I'm looking at my watch because these are slides from a 45-minute talk I usually give that I'm going to burn through in about 10 minutes. So forgive me if I'm moving a little quickly. There's a lot to get through, but I hope that we can just have a high-level discussion here and then dig a little deeper if all y'all are interested in learning more. So that's the book, Nobody Cares. Here's a question. What happens when you drop a pencil, it falls to the ground? What caused the pencil to fall? Gravity, fabulous answer, and it's the correct one, and it's an easy one. Not always the case with these types of questions. What causes homelessness? Inevitably, there are a bunch of answers in the room, and we're going to skip the activity where we all name them, right? Because we're moving quickly. But my point in bringing this up is if you ask folks who are experiencing homelessness, right, as we often do during something like the point in time count, what caused your homelessness? Colloquially, right, interviewing people, what caused your homelessness, you get a lot of different answers, right? And this is like people expressing their lived experience as they rightfully should, right? Why are you no longer with permanent housing? Well, I lost my job, right? Or I was evicted, or I had a divorce, right? And so when you see reports of causes of homelessness published by something like a continuum of care in a county or a city or a state, you'll often see a histogram chart that looks something like this. Here are the reasons why people are experiencing homelessness in a given region or metropolitan area. But I'd like to distinguish between what my co-author Greg Colburn and I consider to be root causes versus these ideas of precipitating events. And the argument here, I think, is well illustrated by a little parable. If you can imagine this game of musical chairs in which folks are walking around a table, right, and there's one fewer chair than the number of people required, and everybody sits down when the music stops, and somebody's left without a chair. The person who, in this instance, is on crutches is going to be predisposed to not have a chair, right? They're slower to get to the supply side of the problem. Now, the question I'd like to pose in reference to the parable is, would we say that the person's crutches, right, perhaps their ankle injury, caused their chairlessness? Or might we zoom the lens out and point at the rules of the game and say, well, it's just as true that if there were another chair around the circle, they would have a spot. And I think this is a useful mode of differentiating between a precipitating event and a root cause, with, of course, the distinction being this individual factor, this kind of self-definitive ankle injury, for example. That may indeed be the proximal reason why Mike is without a chair at the moment. But if the rules of the game were structurally different, if there was another chair, right, like Mike would have one. And so I want to think about the difference between individual precipitating events, right, things about yourself or your circumstances that you can't change, and larger conditions that may or may not indeed influence the likelihood of experiencing homelessness in any given metropolitan area in the country. So let's kind of keep those distinctions in mind going forward. The question at the heart of the book is really, why do rates of homelessness vary so widely throughout the country? Because it's not true that this experience, right, this structural experience is the same everywhere. We know, for example, that Seattle, where I call home, has a per capita rate of homelessness 4 or 5 times that of Chicago. And these are two vibrant metropolitan areas. What's the difference between them that may explain the regional variation in question? So the study that Greg and I ran basically seeks to explain the regional variation in question. And to cut to the chase, we argue that really the only convincing factors that are capable of explaining that variance, right, of explaining the difference between a city like Seattle and a city like Chicago, is not because there are more people with lower incomes living in Seattle. It's not because there are more people at a per capita rate using substances at some disproportionate level. In fact, tight housing markets tend to be the variables that explain the variation in per capita rates of homelessness in question. So what does that look like in practice? Again, a reminder, homelessness does indeed vary from city to city. This is not a monolithic experience in terms of the metropolitan level. I don't know if you can see exactly what's going on here. There's some small print, but the point here is, if you look at the top 25 or so metropolitan areas around the country, we break them down between cities and counties because that's exactly what HUD does when they administer federal dollars for homelessness. These bodies, continuum of care, are sometimes organized at the city level, sometimes organized at the county level, and it's important to keep that distinction in play, inevitably because there are higher population densities in cities than there are in counties. So we differentiate between the two in the book. And lo and behold, at each level of analysis, city or county, at these top 25 or 40 or so MSAs, you see variation in rates of homelessness between something on the order of 1 to something on the order of 10 people experiencing homelessness on any given night per 1,000 people. So what might explain this regional variation? And again, there are a whole bunch of causes or indeed precipitating events, as we just distinguished, that people throw out, right? You hear it in the media, you hear it when you're looking at point-in-time count censuses, you hear it when you're talking to folks operating businesses in a given MSA, right? Do these factors, however, explain the regional variation that we just took a peek at? So I'm just going to go through a bunch of scatter plots very quickly. Oh, well, that doesn't work at all. There's nothing I can tell you about this figure, and perhaps there's nothing I'm going to be able to tell you about any of the other figures if they also do this to me. So, so barring any quick fix, I'm going to cut to the chase. So what you would have seen on that previous slide is the fact that if you look at a chart in which per capita poverty rates are on an x-axis and per capita rates of homelessness are on a y-axis, there's actually an inverse relationship. It's the case that cities with higher rates of poverty tend to have lower rates of per capita homelessness. Why might that be the case? Well, we'll continue talking about that. We also see a negative or indeed a lack of a relationship with respect to rates of serious mental illness. Again, inevitably, apparently you're not going to be able to see the charts in question, but I can tell you what they look like, and the result is not particularly convincing in terms of explaining that regional variation. Rates of illicit drug use also do not explain the variation. Substance use disorder does not explain the variation. Hey, here's a chart that works. If we look at, a measure of, so along the top here we have January average temperature versus quote-unquote indexed homelessness. What is indexed homelessness? That's me just for the purpose of convenience here, mashing cities and counties together. Remember, they're not exactly comparable because of different population densities. But if you instead ask, well, what about the ranking function in terms of San Diego generally being a higher or a lower per capita MSA than any other city, not in terms of the absolute rates in question, but just where does it fall on that top 10 or top 20 list, and then comparing that top 10 or top 20 list to the counties as well. Just a relative measure of severity here. That's more or less what's going on with the indexed rate of homelessness. So you often hear, for example, well, okay, warmer areas are going to be those that are somehow magnets, right? They're these attractors for people experiencing homelessness. And when you put that hypothesis to the test, again, there's kind of no significant explanatory value of January average temperatures versus indexed homelessness. And we picked January, by the way, because that's when the point-in-time count is administered every year by HUD. Okay, well, what about something like the generosity of the welfare state being that which, again, operates as some kind of magnet effect, if you've heard this term, in terms of rates of per capita homelessness? Again, no relationship to speak of here. This is the relationship between the maximum welfare benefit that a household can receive and the median rent in a given MSA. So the ratio there, how generous is the welfare state relative to rent versus per capita homelessness? No relationship. Okay. There are not more people with severely low incomes moving to the MSAs in question that have higher rates of homelessness. In fact, again, the opposite is the relationship. Places with higher rates of inbound low-income migration have lower rates of homelessness. Okay, so what the heck is going on here? Can anything explain the variation in question? Lo and behold, median contract rents do an awfully good job of explaining that variation. So places with higher rents have higher rates of per capita homelessness. Places with lower vacancy rates in the rental market have higher rates of per capita homelessness. So again, what is a rental vacancy rate? It's effectively the percentage of any units that are available for rent on the market at any given point in time. So this is a measure effectively of how tight your housing market is. And again, below what we consider to be the natural vacancy rate, which is somewhere around 4%, and this is well documented in the econometric literature. Lo and behold, you see this corresponding spike in per capita homelessness around the country. It's not a function of population change. You really need that tight housing market to see this big explanatory effect. And yet, population change is useful for getting a sense of how we can distinguish cities along causal lines that allow us to think through how these differences in housing markets may have arisen in the first place. So I'll just wrap up here in a very quick couple of slides. I want to introduce this measure of housing supply elasticity, which is basically just how responsive is your housing market to changes in price, right? And well, what causes change in price? Well, that's something like how many people do you have moving to your region, and can your market keep up with the number of people moving to your region? So we want to look at something like supply elasticity versus population change and see which housing markets might be more accommodating to inbound migration. And when you take a look at a chart like that, something very interesting happens. So we've got change in population on the x-axis down here. So places that are losing population are on the left, and places that are gaining population are on the right. And then you have that measure, that housing supply elasticity. This is how responsive your housing market is to changes in price. That's what's happening on the y-axis. And you'll notice that there are some clusters here. And if you can see the numbers in parentheses, those are the vacancy rates that I mentioned. And there's a very clean breakdown here that suggests basically what you would expect, which is, take a look at that lower right-hand corner. If you have a huge influx of people, and your housing market is not accommodating to those people, inevitably, you're going to have infinitely lower rates of rental vacancies. And you see homelessness spike in kind. And the stories of the other clusters here tell us different stories about what's happening around the country in terms of accommodating rental pressures and housing market pressures. Because if you look in the upper right-hand corner, where there's plenty of accommodation for inbound migration, we don't see corresponding spikes in per capita homelessness because we don't see the same dips in rental vacancy rates. That's the Sun Belt up there, and this is from 2019, I should say. So that, the number for Austin is a little different now. Austin is starting to creep down into that bottom right-hand corner. But broadly, we're looking at areas that have been more accommodating to inbound population pressures. And by extent, you don't see those corresponding spikes in homelessness. So here's kind of our rough breakdown of where we would consider different regions to be on this typological scale. Again, maybe Austin has moved a little bit over the past couple years. But broadly, I would argue that this core truth, the relationship between rental markets and price and risk of losing one's housing and the corresponding structural measure of per capita homelessness is a useful manner of thinking about some of the questions we're going to ask today. So that is my 15 minutes, and I am going to run out of this presentation now. So more soon. It's this big green one.
Thanks, Clay. One of the key messages that I really pull from that book is that, unless we're diagnosing the problem, of course, appropriately, then we will not be identifying the appropriate solutions to invest in. And so if we're not centering housing in our solutions, that is a significant issue, obviously. And what we know works is that the primary solution to homelessness is affordable and accessible homes linked with voluntary supportive services to really help people access the support that they need, but by prioritizing connecting people quickly to housing first, that has been shown to be the most effective approach. So I want to turn to Anna, who Houston has had absolute incredible success in moving thousands of people experiencing homelessness directly into permanent housing. So just want to turn it over to you so you can tell us how you guys have managed to do that.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. It's great to see all of you. Thanks for having me here. Let's see if I can negotiate all of the technology, which I love, by the way. Keep going. Here we go. All right, so on the left, you see Coalition for the Homeless. That is the nonprofit that I work for. We have our own separate board of directors. We are the lead agency for the TX 700 Continuum of Care. We lead more than 100 partners to effectively try to end homelessness in a 3-county area, which is Houston, Fort Bend, and Montgomery. It's about 3,700 square miles. And then the way home, you see this a lot with the coalition together. It's because we essentially have renamed our COC. We don't like to say TX700, so we just renamed it the way home. So that's kind of what you see. But just some quick fun facts about Houston. We're very large, as you can imagine, fourth largest city in the U.S. We can fit about 15 large cities just in Harris County alone. That is where Houston sits. And if Houston had its own economy, it would be the 26th largest in the world. And the Houston Medical Center is the largest medical center in the world, and it has more square footage than downtown Dallas. So we're very, very large. The reality in 2011. So this is the start of the way home. In the sense that we have it now. We were not doing a great job. We had the 6th largest homeless population in the nation. We were leaving a lot of federal dollars unspent. We had a lot of recidivism, and primarily it was because we were not putting the right programs to tailor to the individual needs. We were just doing what we thought was best, not really data-driven. And then we were really lost in this housing readiness. A lot of partners wanted to serve people that were easiest to serve. There was a lot of cherry picking, which left a lot of very vulnerable individuals on the street. So we were not doing a great job. So then we had 2 important shifts in 2012. Those of you that have been doing this for a while might remember way back then, HUD had announced their Priority Communities Initiative. And so because we were not doing a great job, we were identified as one of those priority communities, which meant we got some technical assistance. Yay. And out of that technical assistance was a community charrette, which was basically everyone coming together to figure out what we were doing wrong and what we can do to make it better. And it was essentially all of the partners that we know of, as well as adjacent systems coming together to do this work. And it was very difficult and challenging, but it was, and even though Houston is a large city, we very much, unfortunately, because of our natural disasters that we have there, we are very much a small town in the sense that it's all about helping one another. And so when we find something that needs fixing, we want to all work together towards fixing that, whatever that issue is. So it was a call to action. Of course, it helped that we did have some political will at the time. We had a mayor, Anise Parker, who made homelessness a priority for her platform, that it was very important for her. And so she wanted to make sure that the individuals that especially young adults, because that was her interest, but we wanted to make sure that we addressed the issue. But it was really about getting together to figure out what we were doing, what we needed to come from, and what we needed to get to. So that's the shift that you see here in front of you about transforming homeless services into a crisis response system and getting towards that collective impact, which is what really drove our success. So this collective impact had 5 key elements, and I was trying to kind of, try to remember what were some of those top things that we did to get to this collective impact, and you see them here in front of you. A common agenda, you give us a task, and everyone's working towards that common agenda. For us, it was ending homelessness. Shared measurement. We were not data-driven before. We had a wealth of information. The coalition is also the HMIS lead, and we had great data that we were not even looking at towards making decisions. We had mutually reinforcing activities, so of course the way home was driving that work. And I really can't see, so I'm gonna have to rely on my own little slides here. And then continuous communication, that is the key, becoming transparent, not doing things in silo, which is what we were doing before. I was working at a different nonprofit at the time, but no one really understood what was happening at the Coalition for the Homeless, who was still the collaborative applicant at the time. And then lastly, it was the backbone support. So just because we were switching to a different governance system didn't mean that we weren't going to need the support of an individual agency to make sure everything keeps moving towards that same common goal. So when you think about building this system to end homelessness, you think the first thing we had to do was governance, right? So in 2012, the foundation of our system was going to be a new COC decision-making body with key components like representation, transparency, and authority. We didn't want to be in that silo anymore. We wanted to make sure everybody understood what was happening, that everybody had buy-in, that everyone had say-so, that everyone contributed, and by everyone I mean not just partners, but individuals that lived experience that could contribute towards what we needed to do to set that path forward. And then in 2013, we identified and implemented immediate strategies and activities to trigger this system-wide transformation. We wanted to make sure that, it was going to be like a domino effect. We had to right-size our interventions. We had to map our system using data. We held some housing models exercises to make sure that we were identifying what the appropriate mix was going to be. We wanted to build a coordinated placement system to triage people, standardize the assessment and referral so we could control placement and ensure that the mix that we were going to work on was fully utilized. And then we wanted to connect services to housing by streamlining some of those front door systems with the focus on rapid housing placements, and then move some of the services to backdoor programs to support the housing stabilization that we needed for these individuals that we were trying to house. And so then in 2014 and beyond, really, it was about strengthening this new system that we had created. Coordinated entry was implemented. We had this new change management that was the domino effect that we wanted, that was just constantly turning. It generated a need for a lot of communication, constant communication. I can't say that enough. Influence on ongoing planning and implementation. We strengthened capacity building with new trainings, new investments from private entities. The linchpin of our system is and continues to be performance. We really are very data-driven. I love data. I started in coordinated entry. That was my task, was to implement coordinated entry in our COC. And then I moved to our HMIS department, but it still remains a huge focus for me. It's like, let's look at the data. If there's ever any issue, the first thing I say to my team is, let's look at the data and see what the data is telling us. And then lastly, we really created this bridge to other systems so that we were making sure we were partnering with all of those systems that the individuals that we were serving touch. So what you see here in front of you is the final governance structure. The COC steering committee is the body, the decision-making body, and it has all of these adjacent systems that have standard seats, like public housing authorities, the VA, for example, Department of Children and Family. And then we have provider voted seats, so we have 2 provider seats that get voted on every 2 years. We have individuals with lived experience, and so that decision-making body is what votes on the work. The coalition is the support for all of this. And so those buckets that you see there at the bottom are all of our partners working towards whatever task they've been handed. So an example would be when we were trying to end end veteran homelessness. We had a veteran work group that just, all we did was meet every week towards that task. And then if changes needed to be made, so for example, coordinated entry, we needed a new housing prioritization tool. The work was done by our partners with the coalition, somebody from the coalition supporting, and then whatever decision or whatever work came out of that goes up to the steering committee for a vote. And then the steering committee either passes or they send it back for us to do some revisions, et cetera. And so all of the COC, the steering committee meetings are, and anyone can participate. We hold them virtual, but they're open to the public. And again, it's very, very transparent. And so the results of that first 5-year strategic plan that we had, these are all of the things that came out of that, right? So we implemented coordinated access. We were one of the largest cities in the nation to end veteran homelessness. Our initial goal, we started coordinated entry with permanent supportive housing. And so we wanted to create 2,500 slots of permanent supportive housing because we had a huge number of individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. And again, that's what the data told us. So the data told us that we had 1,500 individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. We had 300 chronic veterans experiencing chronic homelessness, and we had 800 veterans that were not chronically homeless. And then we had 100 vulnerable families. We had 100 transition-age youth, and that's where we got our number of 2,500. And again, this was looking at our data, looking at our system and mapping it out. And ultimately, we did exceed this goal. We ended up creating 3,000 units of permanent supportive housing. And then in 2015, we added rapid rehousing to this mix. So we were doing, we were really like just flying high at this point. So we're like, we've put all these things in place. We're doing great. We've decreased homelessness by 53%. And then this really not so nice guy named Harvey came to visit us. And so for the first time ever, in 2018, we saw an 18% increase in our homeless numbers as a direct result of Hurricane Harvey. Around that time, we were starting, even though we had seen a decrease, we were kind of like just flat. Our numbers didn't go up really high after that or really low. And so the epidemiologists and the statisticians that work with us to do our homeless counts were like, you're kind of like, you're flat. This is something needs to happen. And we really needed an influx to get over the hump. We had doubled the amount of COC funding that came into the community, but we had pretty much maximized all of the resources that, we needed to, that we could use at that point. So we're back to the table again for another community charrette, and now it's time to do our next 5-year strategic plan. So this was just prior to the pandemic. We had a lot of input sessions to try to figure out what we needed next, because we knew the initial 2,500, right? So then we did a whole new system mapping, and this is what you see here in front of you. We actually have a manual. So this was right before the pandemic. This was ready to roll out. Right during the pandemic. And the data, of course, these are some of the things that we look at. So we look at, obviously, inflow. We look at our homeless count. We look at the system performance measures. We want to know how many people are newly homeless, first time in the system, how many people are returning to homelessness, so that we know if our programs are working or not. Individuals timing into chronicity, that's a big one, because even though it sounds weird, but we had decreased chronic homelessness by so much. We're so close to ending chronic homelessness at this point. But if our system slows down by any means, if we don't keep going, then that means we're not housing people fast enough to prevent them from timing into being chronically homeless. And by that I mean the 24 months or 24 months and 3 years, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of this was happening, and then, of course, another disaster, the pandemic. So our 5-year strategic plan, actually, we had a kind of a leg up, right? We'd done all of this work, and so at the beginning of the pandemic, when we realized all of these CARES resources and all of this federal funding was going to come into our community, we wanted to immediately implement our 5-year strategic plan, because we knew that this was an unprecedented opportunity to really get at that hump that we needed to really make a dent in our homeless numbers over the next 5 years. And so we created the Community COVID Housing Program, which was a way to use housing as healthcare, to prevent individuals from experiencing homelessness, from getting the virus. And we really knew that this was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And of course, all of this was done using the Housing First. No more cherry picking. We were housing the most vulnerable. We had a locally developed prioritization tool that we were using. And so this is what the funding mix looked like for our CHIP program, is what we call it. And so the goal was to serve 5,000 individuals in 2 years with what you see here in front of you. So as using rapid rehousing as a bridge to permanent supportive housing, to house people immediately so they're not waiting on the streets for a slot to open up. Rapid rehousing, diversion, brand new. We'd never done this before. And so we got a lot of great training from LA to figure out how we could prevent people from entering the homeless response system. And then really beefing up our mental health and behavioral health case management. So pretty much everybody that got a housing referral also received a referral for substance, mental health, or any other issues that they were dealing with, so that they could stabilize in housing. Enhanced street outreach. So we actually wrote a manual on how to decommission encampments with housing. And so we're doing that. We're doing that this week. We've been doing it for the past 2 weeks. We actually are closing encampments and moving people directly into housing. And so we worked with our TA provider to write the manual on that. Housing preservation and some of the things that you see here in front of you. So then landlord engagement was a huge one for us. In addition to coordinated entry, it's something that we learned, unfortunately, after Hurricane Harvey. And that's because when we had so many people in the disaster shelters and we had to get them out of the disaster shelters, it was pretty much tasked to the Coalition for the Homeless. The mayor put a call out to landlords and said, if you are a property manager or an owner and you have apartments that you are willing to rent out to people that are in the disaster shelters, please let us know. Within 24 hours, we had 3,000 market apartments ready. We were bombarded. And so this sparked the idea, like, why aren't we doing this for homelessness? So then we decided to create landlord engagement staff as a permanent staff at the Coalition for the Homeless. So this started the landlord engagement process that we have now. And so the landlord engagement staff, they act as the advocate for the landlord, but they recruit landlords to work with the homeless response system, but they do have to sign an agreement with us that says that they'll, not evict, that they'll work with case managers or the landlord engagement team to do a mutual rescission if it ends up that they don't want that individual there anymore, and then we can reuse that unit for someone else. We also pay landlord incentive fees for every single individual that we house. In the beginning, we used private dollars, some of the private dollars that we raised for CHIP, but then eventually we were able to use some federal resources for those landlord incentive fees. Now we're at the point where we're using holding fees because we're starting to feel that tightening of the housing market where we've never felt it before. Houston, even though we're the fourth largest city in the U.S., we've been pretty affordable when it comes to housing. And prior to the pandemic, you could still find a one-bedroom for $800. And so when CHIP started in October of 2020, our landlord engagement team had 600 units ready to go. So we pretty much turned our wait list over about, I can't even remember I lost count of how many times, because we were housing people so quickly with this engagement process. The other thing that we were able to see from the data, again, is that this landlord engagement process does have some effect on equalizing time to housing across racial demographics. And by that I mean, if you're familiar with the navigation term, we use that in our system. So a navigator takes the individual from the point of a housing referral until they can move in. And so they'll help that person look for an apartment. But the old way is I'm a case manager or a navigator, and I'm taking my client with me to all of these different landlords, having to pay a application fee. Heaven forbid my client smells some kind of way or is acting some kind of funny way. And then that landlord is probably going to tell them no, which happens over and over and over and over, multiple times being told no before a landlord will accept that individual. Well, with the landlord engagement process, we have a pool of units all over the city, and we have pictures, and we show them to the clients on the website. And so the landlord doesn't actually meet the individual until the day that that person moves in. So you can see before COVID or before CHIP and after CHIP, the length of time we've reduced that waiting period before someone gets housed. You can see the number of days has gone down significantly. So that was really an eye-opener for us. It was great. And then so we're at the point now where we conducted a point-in-time count every year of the pandemic, unsheltered as well. And so we have reduced homelessness now by 63% since we started this work, so we're very proud of this. And then I will just leave this picture here with you. This is our soccer stadium, and I always forget, it's 22,000 people can fit into that soccer stadium, and so we've now housed over 28,000, so more than can fit into that soccer stadium.
Thanks so much, Anna. I mean, it really is amazing what Houston has managed to do. And I thank you, too, for bringing up the piece about landlord engagement, because it is something that we hear a lot about engaging landlords. So that was very, really helpful. And I think another key element that you highlighted was the importance of collaboration and a shared agenda. And so I wanted to turn to you, Claudine, because Destination Home was founded to kind of to address the common goal of solving homelessness and making that case. And so I was just wondering if you could kind of just tell us more about that collective impact approach as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Elena. So a little over a decade ago, the Stanford Social Innovation Review published an article that had a subhead under it. It read, large-scale social change requires coordination. Yet the social sector remains focused on the isolated intervention of individual organizations. And I feel like my county did that so well for such a long time. And it's completely relatable to what you were speaking about earlier, Anna. So what we had before 2011 was no coordination. We had no process for coordinated reentry. We had no shared data, and we had no aligned resources. So solving homelessness in Santa Clara County is not anything new. I mean, our county has almost 2 million people, 15 cities, and one of those cities is home to more than 1 million people. That city is the city of San Jose. So that was a big problem. Everybody was doing their own thing, and that included the city of San Jose and the Santa Clara County, along with all of the other providers that were in our network, including housing providers and nonprofits that were providing supportive services to help solve homelessness. In about 2011, we had some leaders that really believed in collective impact and this need to bring together a public-private partnership that then aligns on creating a strategic plan to work towards solving homelessness in our area. So we now have a joint plan to end homelessness, and that plan is called the Community Plan to End Homelessness. Our collective impact is mature in that it's in its second iterative plan to end homelessness. We have very robust goals. One of our goals for our second plan from 2020 to 2025 is to end homelessness for 20,000 people, and we're well on our way there. Of course, there's criticism that comes from everywhere, but so far, Destination Home, my organization, continues to play that role of convening people from the city, from the county, and along with 70+ participating agencies from our COC, and coming together to support this plan, and then holding each other accountable through data.
Thank you. Yeah, of course it answers. Yeah, that was awesome. And I want to stick with you for a little bit longer too, just to talk about, because in your role at Destination Home, it's your job, you're the Director of Lived Experience and Innovation, and you have personal lived experience as well. So I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about not only why, but how the various stakeholders involved in homeless response and affordable housing can really engage and partner with people with lived experience to make sure that we are including people, centering and amplifying their voices at every step of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So as you heard Elena said just now, and also when she read a brief bio about me, I am a human with lived experience of homelessness. I refer to myself and others as human. Sorry. Because we have value and worth that no one can take away. Even when you lose your housing, you're still human. So back to your question, I apologize. So no one knows more about the realities and the difficulties of homelessness than the people that have walked through it, right? The people that have journeyed through it. I myself was a veteran, before, and I had a college education before I fell into homelessness. And just like my new friend Clayton here talked about earlier with root causes versus precipitating events, I feel like the reasons I fell into homelessness or had bouts of homelessness they weren't root causes. They were more precipitating events that in my specific instance did not integrate very well with the structural systems in place. And instead of that structural system in place having a safety net that could catch me, it actually let me fall through the safety net. And it was so difficult, right? It's so difficult to get back, get out of that quicksand is what I used to describe it. And that's why now, having walked through all of that, living in a car, having the car be repoed, bouncing in and out of shelters, being outside in the elements, and then experiencing a very dehumanizing, I want to say thing that comes with being homeless. And what I mean by that is people that are not experiencing homelessness looking at you or driving by you or, in public places and either avert their eyes or look at you as if you're less than human. So this is the reason. I strongly feel that people with lived expertise or experiences of homelessness, they understand the complexities of homelessness. They understand what it's like to stand in line and then be turned away because it's 5 p.m. and the government is closed. They understand what it's like to be asked to complete a digital application. Thank you. Complete a digital application that comes through your email and not know exactly how to even create an email address. All of these different barriers that people have walked through. They understand, if some of you use the VI SPDAT as your prioritization tool, they understand being scored in the rapid rehousing range from 4 to 7 when you know in the deepest depths of your heart that you should fall within the permanent supportive housing range. They understand and know all of those things. They also know, some of you that work in our system, in the housing and homelessness system, they know some of you that have this heart that says, it's 4:45 p.m. when you walk in, I close the door at 5 p.m., but damn it, I'm gonna stand here and help you until you receive that help. We know who those people are. And this is the reason why we absolutely have to have people with lived experience and of homelessness and housing instability and so many ands, justice involvement, domestic violence, all of it, foster care youth, all of those people at the table when you all make decisions that impact the lives of people like them, right? That's all it takes. You invite people to the table. You pull up a chair, unlike in the music chairs game that Clayton illustrated earlier. You pull up enough chairs for every person to have a voice. But then you don't stop at that. You make it possible for them to come and sit in the chair. What does that look like? It might mean getting a lift for them so they can show up to the meeting. Some people, and I know this very well for myself when I was experiencing homelessness, I knew that I smelled bad. I knew it. I didn't want to be sitting next to a professor from University of Washington and an acclaimed author smelling like the way that I did. Do you think that people experiencing homelessness would want to do the same thing at your table? No, they don't. So how do we make it possible for them to come have a seat at the table? We provide them the supports that they need, transportation, childcare. We value their time, so we should compensate them, give them a stipend for what they need. So as a person now that is working from inside the system at Santa Clara County, I sit on the governance board for our COC, and I stare down the other people in that group, people that have PhDs and so many letters behind their names, I don't even know what they mean, right? People that were born from the womb to be presidents and CEOs of organizations, right? That are so used to holding the power in their hands to change the life of humans like me, right? And yet maybe succumb to pressures, peer pressures, that don't allow them to act on what is in their hearts to create that solution that a person like me would need. So how do we go back to the second part of Elena's question? How should you bring people in and ensure that they are informing the way that you do policy, that you design programs, that you offer services, that you write out operations manuals for your sites? Well, it's very easy. In order for you to invite or to engage with someone and hear them, they have to sit right next to you. That means you have to be okay with them sitting right next to you, right? And you have to be okay with that person expressing themselves in the most authentic way, because that's all they know. And you also have to be okay with the fact that people experiencing homelessness and coming out of unsheltered homelessness have to live through survival mode, even after they become housed. It takes a long time for someone to no longer be operating from there's a part of the brain back there you all know about, the medulla oblongata, right? It takes a long time for someone to shift from that to the frontal lobe where they can now make logical decisions. So be okay with that. Now that you're okay with that, thank you. Now I'm going to move into 4 things. The first thing is you prioritize leadership positions for people like me to be at the table. That means I never dreamed of sitting at a table like this. So thank you, Elena. What that means is you seek out people with lived experience of homelessness and be intentional about inviting them. Number 2, you create spaces within your supportive housing system or whatever it is, your COC, and prioritizing people of color and brown people, right? Prioritizing those subgroups to be at the table to evaluate your system of care, this supportive housing system, and then have them make recommendations on how this thing should change. But there has to be a part that falls on you, and that part is accepting that something is wrong with this system, right? So many of us that work in the housing and homelessness sector, a lot of us, the initiatives that we birth, that we lose time with our families over, we become very attached to these things. Well, sometimes when the landscape of the world is changed by a pandemic, it means like it no longer works, right? And you have to be open to change coming in, especially from someone that has lived through and has said, I'm sure it looked amazing on a slide deck. I'm sure it looked amazing when you presented it, to your COC governance board, but I'm telling you, it doesn't work. And since it doesn't work, how can we make it better, right? The third thing I want to bring up is prioritize hiring people with lived experience. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not easy. It's never going to be easy because dealing with humans, period, lived experience or not, is difficult, right? But for a human, an average human like me and you, well, maybe not me, an average human that has not experienced homelessness, when you hit a point in your life where you have to pick yourself up and refocus, it takes a lot of determination to do that. Now you add lived experience of homelessness, it takes them 10 times even harder work, right? To muster up the determination needed to refocus their life. That's what happened with me. But the thing about me is I had advantages. I had a family support they were 6,000 miles away in American Samoa, but they were still there. They couldn't help me from where they were. I had a college education. I served in the military. I was a veteran. And yet I didn't even know the Veterans Administration had help available for veterans falling into homelessness. I had no idea. And on top of that, for me, was substance abuse. I learned how to drink like a sailor in the Navy, and I perfected it until it then produced a whole lot of consequences for me and really contributed to my becoming homeless. So the last part that I would like to say is incentivize people, the people that are most impacted by your services, incentivize them to participate, to be hired on. So especially people of color and other populations too, like LGBTQ positions, right? But when you do that, understand, and again, something you have to accept, it comes with difficulties and struggles, and you can't throw the towel in when you've been 1 year into the process. No, it's going to take years. You have to build it on values. What you ask yourself right now, if I am interested in integrating the voices of people with lived experience into my program, into my entity, into my system, what are the values of lived experience that I should uphold? Because those values are so important, because you're going to build your principles on top of those values, and then everything else follows. How do you do that? Well, you're not going to do it on your own. Sorry about that. You got to share the work. And you need to share it with people with lived experience of homelessness and housing instability. That's where a lot of the expertise comes from that is lacking right now, right? You all do amazing work, right? But we should also listen then and bring those in that are most proximal to the issue that we are trying to solve. We're not going to solve homelessness without the people that have experienced homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudine. I really appreciate you being here with us at this table. And you know, I think one of the struggles right now that communities are also seeing is this backlash against people who are experiencing homelessness, and a rash of criminalization laws as well, that are really out of sight, out of mind policies that are doing nothing to address the crisis. Instead, they are just appeasing people who don't want to see it in their own communities. And so I'm wondering too, this notion of of perception shaping policy, and how we can shift this narrative about what homelessness is, who is experiencing it, the human aspect of this. I'm really glad that you phrased it in that way for me. I am a human, because it's a concern that all of this, relying on these harmful narratives instead of realizing that homelessness is structural in nature, and because it's structural in nature, it requires a structural solution, is really something that I think a lot of communities are dealing with. So I'm also wondering if you guys could kind of speak to that in terms of how do we bring the data in this book, or how do we bring these experiences to really shape the perception of what homelessness is all about, and what we need to solve it.
I have a very quick answer to that question that I think maybe bridges a couple of the perspectives we've heard, and it relies on a word that Anna used earlier, this notion of diversion. And for those of you who aren't familiar, diversion in the homelessness services world is this programmatic approach whereby you treat people like humans, right? As opposed to suggesting that homelessness is a monolith, as opposed to suggesting that everybody who loses their housing loses it for the same reasons and needs the same solution. Instead, you meet people where they are and ask them what they need. And this is not integration of lived experience into policy making, but it is integration of lived experience and human dignity into program delivery. And furthermore, I would argue it's often pretty darn cost effective, right? Because not everybody needs permanent supportive housing. Some people lose their housing because they get a flat tire and they're late to work, so they lose their job, so they're late on rent, so they get evicted. They don't need wraparound supportive services and a free apartment at $20,000 a year, right? Or indeed more, right? Depending on where we're talking. They might just need a new tire or a new car. And they'll tell you that, right? And so I think in terms of integrating the voice of people, not just into policymaking, but into program delivery, my short answer is to ask people what they need and make sure that you have resources available to deliver what they ask for.
Oh, I want to bring up real quick. So if you have not purchased this book, and I'm not just saying this because of my new friend Clayton, if you have not purchased this book, holy moly, you have got to buy one. So I ended up buying a printed copy to go with my Audible copy, just because the graphs like you've seen on Clayton's slides earlier, they're not available on Audible, so you have to buy the book anyway. But anyhow, I've been reading through this thing, and I have these moments of, yes, thank you for having someone voice that. And then there were parts where your soul sort of feels like it's empty. And then you get to the part where you just bawl your eyes out because your heart hurts, right? So the part that made my heart hurt is sort of the part that he touched on in the book. So you read through the book and you and I'm not trying to sell his books for him, though. I'm just saying, but he will sign any book that you buy. So the part, you read through the whole thing and you see a bunch of graphics and tables, and then explanations about why these graphs are there. And then you get to the part that says conclusion. Get a drink of coffee, maybe take a break, come back the next day and pick it up, because what you're in for in conclusion is going to take a lot of that heart, yay, duh, like all of that, right? And be ready with a poster board or a jam board if you use that, whatever it takes, because the meat of the entire book is in the back in that conclusion, right? And I'm not going to read it to you because you got to buy your own book. But it does say that the part that Elena is asking about as part of the quote-unquote prescription, the interrelated steps. Number 1 is changing public perceptions of homelessness. There's a study that is referenced in here where they actually they did a brain activity study, and it showed normal humans, pictures of humans that were experiencing homelessness, and it says extreme outgroups may be perceived as less than human. Brain activity when viewing the latter images was also consistent with neural fingerprints of disgust. That's the part where I put the book down and bawled my eyes out, right? So changing public perception, I understand why data-driven approaches and solutions are so important, but you cannot do data without the qualitative elements, right? You add pictures and images to people's faces, right? You help the NIMBYs and the people that stand up against solutions to end homelessness, people that want to arrest instead of giving somebody a home. You offer images like that, and you convince those people through those images that the people experiencing homelessness are human just like them. The only difference is they have a house and they don't, right? So I also love data, but sometimes the data gives you that feeling of an empty soul, right? Mm-hmm. Where there's no narrative or there's no image that goes along with this that helps me emotionally connect to anything or to any solution. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Powerful. Thank you. Awesome. So I think I want to leave some time for questions from the audience, actually. So yes, great. You will be bringing around the mic. That would be wonderful. I think we have some folks in the back over there.
Hello. Hi, my name's Johnny. I'm from southwestern PA. Myself, wow, this is kind of intimidating, right? There are a lot of people and not my kind of people. And what I mean, it's like she said about being a human. So my entire life, I come from domestic violence background. I've never lived anywhere to this date longer than 2 years, other than a prison cell. One of my major hurdles in the world of stability within my home is the falling through the gaps of the continuous cycle. And what I mean by that is not only I'm a recovering addict, and that's great. And I mean, I should have been clean always in the first place, so I don't ever say that for any reason other than to say what happened is I deal with mental health also. And this is what happens in the cycle of my life. I get out. I mean, so this last time I paroled from prison to a homeless shelter. I've spent 10 years of my adult life incarcerated. I've been home for 3 years now. This is the longest I've been free since the cycle started when I was 12 years old. I've been in and out of institutions since I was 10 years old. And I say that because there's a sense of animalistic living that happens once you start living on the street. This last time I paroled to a homeless shelter, and God stepped in and put somebody in my life that believed in me and showed me how to live life, right? And I say that because in that homeless shelter, there are people there who are not capable of ever taking care of themselves. So in ending homelessness, how do we teach people to maintain the home that we want to put them in? Because some people are just not mentally capable, and if you put them in long-term mental health places, my uncle works at one in Indiana, their insurance times out, right? I only get 5 years of welfare insurance. maybe Medicare, whatever does its thing, but what do I do? So what has always happened with me prior to this new experience is, and I'll make it short and I apologize because my mind is everywhere. This is what happens. I get out, I get on medication because the state lets me get Medicaid, right? And then I get on my medication and I become stable and I'm through therapy. And then I get the job. And then I make too much money for the Medicaid. So now I have to choose mental health medication or a home. And I'm already in the home with a binding lease and a family. So I have to pick the home. And then I go without my medication, and then I can't commit to the job, and then I commit another felony. And then what happens, I'm back in prison, and my family's displaced once again. So I'm married with 4 kids, and I've only been home for 3 years. So we can do some math here, right? I haven't been the greatest father based on my choices, and I own that. But what I'm saying is the gap has continually been is when I start to make the money, I lose the coverage of the insurance. I can't afford the insurance with my employer, and I make too much to maintain Medicaid, and I can't. So it's the gap. I always fall through the cracks, you know. And today I'm there, and we're just working on it. So my question is, how do we teach people to maintain, right? Like, I'm here, I promise you 4 years ago, sitting in a prison cell, I didn't think I'd be in this room. Right? And I definitely didn't think I'd have a voice anywhere, let alone to be invited to go on Thursday with the group I came here with. So.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your experience, man. I would agree that that's a great question. You know, how do we ensure that you maintain? I would also just offer that another question is, how do we ensure that those gaps don't exist in the first place, right? It's not all on you, you know? And I think part of what we're talking about up here is the fact that there are several disparate systems that remain unintegrated, right? You used the word siloed earlier, and Claudia, you've been talking about human experience. And when you try to mash something like human experience into a siloed system, stuff's going to fall through the cracks. And I think, you know, we're speaking a little bit generally at the moment, but in terms of data integration across silos, and in terms of speaking to human experience, and by human experience, I mean the entirety of human experience, not just one's experience with this thing that we call housing. Speaking to the entirety of human experience implies working from a place of integration. And it's easier said than done, but in terms of prioritizing goals that have yet to be reached, it's right up there on my list.
I want to thank the gentleman for your for being brave and having the courage to stand up and talk. So I really think that, like, the second part of the title of our workshop today is best practices in housing first, right? Housing first, sir, is not just a house over your head and you're one and done, right? It comes with services, and that's what we're pushing here, because taking someone, as all of you already know, taking someone out of an encampment or whatever housing instability situation they're in and putting them in a house and saying, all right, you're good to go, we're going to go get the other 19,000 people and house them. It's never going to work, because people need support in learning how to do your laundry, how to cook food, how to go shopping, how to get a library card, how to catch a bus, how do you get a bus pass in the first place. And I really appreciate your answer, Clayton, because another one of the things that's clearly articulated in this book is system factors and individual factors. Sarah, you brought up a mix of those two. And one of the other things that's addressed in this book is, I'm not sure you know about it, sir, but one of the other things that I really like that's being addressed in this book is really where that starts to make the interactions between what's going on down here in the individual factors and also up here in the systemic factors. So I hope that provided you with some encouragement.
Okay, so I am from Boston, Massachusetts. I have a question and I also have a comment. My question is, when I walked in, the lady from, I have to, okay. So So when I walked in, the lady from Houston, I believe, was speaking, and you mentioned that with Hurricane Harvey, you had an 18% increase in homelessness. And you mentioned also about a 5-year strategic plan. So I am wondering whether you are factoring into your strategic plans, and for everyone else on the panel, anything about climate change. I do not want you to yet answer. I want to say, with a comment that I have. So you mentioned that a 1-bedroom in Houston is $800. In Boston, in Massachusetts, where I am from, I just called up Zillow, and our median rent is $3,200. And this, it's a minus $93, so it dropped. But the year-over-year change is $400. So I want to say to you, ma'am, with the jacket, as somebody who was also formerly homeless, that your face as a face of homelessness, not currently, is the kind of face that we need. Because if I say vacation, people think of the beach or Jamaica or Disney World. If I say homeless, people think of a bag lady. People think of somebody pushing a shopping cart. People think of people sleeping under a bridge. This is not the only face of homelessness. We are not even speaking of the people who are doubling in apartments with a relative or a loved one. The face of homelessness is not the face that we think. Who would have looked at you and thought that you were homeless? This is the face of homelessness, and it is because society looks at homeless in a negative connotation that we have some of the problems that we have today. Thank you very much.
We have not, unfortunately, put that in our 5-year strategic plan about climate change. I know that there's starting conversations about that kind of stuff and related to funding, but also housing and things like that. I know the conversations happen more in cities like Houston because of the flooding events that we've had and all of those things. But yeah, it's unfortunately it's not $800 anymore. It's a little over $1,000 for a 1-bedroom. It's still not like Boston and California and all that, but yeah.
Hi, my name is Marsh Santoro. I'm from Portland, Oregon. Been advocating for just a couple of years or more, and I was on a Zoom meeting just this Monday here in the hotel when I got here, and LHIC's housed National Call to Affordable, Stable, Universal Housing. And they did it on Housing First. And one of the speakers was talking about how they have been housing veterans with using Housing First. And Houston was actually one of the cities they mentioned that has gotten rid of, or that has housed all their vets. And they even showed a map where they've housed all the vets, and three of our states has ended homeless vets. I can't remember exactly which ones they were. But the strategy was, and I think Houston has pretty well used it, and I want to know if Housing First models are going to start using this, because I'm a champion of Housing First, and I'm seeing that if the United States is going to use this, we are going to have to tweak it. And we're going to have to tweak it really well and start doing it the way this panel has talked about it, in such a way that we are going to have to take the individual, we're going to have to sit with the individual using all the wraparound services, saying, what do you need? Maybe you don't need a house first. Maybe you need something else first. So I'm wondering, when you guys are looking at Housing First in your communities, are you doing this? Or are you just saying, here, we're going to house you first and then ask you what you need? Or are we asking you what you need first and then go from there?
So in Houston, we just started, and of course I can't speak for other communities, but we just started what we're calling community practice standards. because we know, what has been said so far, especially from the gentleman in the back about the falling through the cracks and the supportive services that are needed is different for every individual. And so when we see, people returning to homelessness or people falling into homelessness for the first time, it's all about, why is it that this particular organization either does it really well or doesn't do really well? And so it's unfortunate that even with the same amount of funding, you don't get the same level of support, in the same services. And so we are trying to change that in our community by taking individuals, humans with lived experience, and asking them what they need. And so we started with that, then we went to our partners that have worked with so many individuals and went through an entire, many meetings to figure out what it looks like to provide the same supportive services for individuals in all of our housing programs. So it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what agency, you're going to be held to these standards. And we're taking it to the steering committee next month for them to vote on it. And I'm not gonna lie, it's still not, sometimes some of our partners look at us crazy. But some partners really want to do well. They want to do those things, but they just don't have the money to do it. And it's not standard in funding either. So if you look at some of the homeless funding that we get, you get increases for fair market rent, but there are providers that have gotten the same flat funding for supportive services for years. And so they have to rely on trying to get external funding to support that so they can get anywho, we can just go on and on, but that's what we're doing in Houston to try to get to that point. We're doing it for case management, and supportive services. We're doing it for outreach. We're doing it in our coordinated entry, but it's baby steps. We're just starting that.
Great. Actually, we are out of time. This went really, really fast, but I really want to thank all of you so much for showing up today and contributing to this amazing conversation. And thank you, all of you, for attending. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.